The collapse of a perfect life, Ethan. Blake stood before the towering glass windows of his office, his reflection merging with the city skyline that sprawled endlessly beneath him. A shimmering sea of ambition and noise, much like the restless world inside his own heart. At 45, Ethan was a man the world called a success story, a self-made billionaire whose name had become synonymous with power, luxury, and control. His chain of international hotels gleamed in major cities, his investments flourished, and his picture often graced business magazines that praised his genius and relentless determination. But beneath the finely tailored suits and sharp words, beneath the applause and the clinking of champagne glasses at grand openings, there lived a silence, a hollow ache that even he refused to acknowledge. It was the kind of emptiness that wealth could not fill and time could not heal. The morning had started like any other, his schedule packed, his coffee strong, his assistant efficient, yet something inside Ethan felt off, a heaviness in his chest that no amount of ambition could shake off. But he brushed it away, just another sign of stress, he told himself, the price of greatness. His phone buzzed with a message from Sabrina Holt, his fiancée, reminding him of their dinner with investors that evening. Sabrina was perfect in every way that society expected. Poised, sophisticated, and strategically aligned with his lifestyle, she understood appearances mattered more than emotions. That power was best displayed, not felt. She was beautiful, yes, but her beauty came with calculation. Every word rehearsed, every smile deliberate. Ethan admired her efficiency, though he often wondered, somewhere deep in the buried corners of his heart, whether admiration had ever truly been love. He walked toward his desk, the leather of his shoes whispering against the polished marble floor. His office was immaculate, everything in order, everything under control, yet today control felt distant, like a fragile illusion held together by threads of routine. He signed contracts, answered calls, and conducted meetings with the same calm dominance that had built his empire. But between moments of triumph, a shadow lingered, the echo of laughter from years ago, soft and pure, belonging to a woman he had once loved deeply, the only woman who had seen through the armor of his ambition, Dr. Maya Reed. It had been nearly 6 years since he had last seen her. 6 years since the night he'd broken her heart and told her to leave his life forever. He could still recall the argument vividly, her voice trembling as she stood in their apartment, tears glistening in her eyes, pleading for something as simple as time. She had said, "Ethan, I don't want your money. I just want you." And he had replied coldly, "Then you want the one thing I cannot give." She had left that night. And with her departure went the last warmth his life had known. Ethan had buried her memory beneath layers of success, but memories, like embers, never truly die. They just wait for the right breath of air to ignite again. By afternoon, the office was humming with the low thrum of productivity. His team celebrated another closed deal, and Ethan was halfway through reviewing financial projections when the pain struck. It wasn't the dull ache of fatigue this time, but a sudden, brutal force that tore through his chest like lightning. The pen fell from his hand. The papers scattered across the desk. His vision blurred and his breath caught in his throat. Panic flashed in his eyes as he clutched at his shirt. His left arm numb, his heartbeat erratic. His assistant rushed in, her voice distant, distorted, calling his name, "Mr. Blake, are you okay?" But her words sounded like echoes from the end of a long tunnel. He tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. The world tilted, the edges of his vision darkened, and as the city outside shimmered through the glass, Ethan fell. When he awoke, the world was softer, slower, and painfully bright. He was no longer in control. Machines hummed around him, the steady beep of a monitor counting out his fragile heartbeat. His body felt heavy, foreign, and weak. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled his lungs. He blinked several times, struggling to understand where he was. The ceiling above was white, sterile, infinite, and it took him several seconds to realize, a hospital. He was in a hospital. Confusion turned to dread as the memory of the pain returned in flashes. The sudden collapse, the cold floor, the shouting. And then nothing. "You're awake," a calm, composed voice said from nearby. Ethan turned his head slowly, and in that instant, the air seemed to vanish from the room. Standing beside his bed was a woman in a white coat, her hair tied neatly in a bun, her presence steady and professional. Yet her eyes, those eyes, they belonged to a chapter of his life he thought was long closed. It was Maya, Dr. Maya Reed, his past, his mistake, his ghost. For a moment, Ethan forgot the tubes and wires, forgot the monitors and the pain. All he could do was stare. "Maya," he whispered, her name escaping like a confession. She didn't flinch, didn't smile. Her expression remained calm, distant, her tone perfectly professional. "Mr. Blake, you suffered a major cardiac arrest," she said. "We performed an emergency angioplasty to restore blood flow to your heart. You're stable now, but it was close, another 15 minutes, and the outcome could have been irreversible." Her voice, though clinical, carried the same gentleness he remembered from years ago, yet it now held something else. Distance, control, boundaries forged from pain. Ethan wanted to speak, to thank her, to apologize, to ask why fate had chosen this cruel symmetry. But his throat burned with dryness, and his voice betrayed him. Finally, he managed to say, "You saved my life." And Maya, without looking at him, simply said, "I did my job." Those 4 words sliced through him deeper than any scalpel. She adjusted the monitors with mechanical precision, her hand steady, her demeanor calm. But he could see the flicker of emotion beneath her professionalism. Her eyes avoided his, focusing instead on the glowing numbers that measured his pulse. "How long have I been here?" he asked quietly. "Since last night," she replied. "You went into cardiac arrest at your office. Paramedics arrived just in time. You're lucky, Mr. Blake. Very lucky." He swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. I didn't know you worked here." "I've been here for 4 years," she said curtly. "Head of cardiology now." Pride lingered in her tone, but it wasn't for him to admire anymore. "You'll be under observation for a few days," she continued, flipping through his chart after that. "You'll need rehabilitation, diet control, and no stress." She glanced briefly at him, her eyes like frost over fire. "In other words, a new life." A nurse entered then, breaking the tension, and Maya stepped back, professional mask firmly in place. "Dr. Patel will be handling your recovery from tomorrow," she said. "I've already assigned your case," Ethan frowned. "You won't be my doctor?" Maya hesitated only for a second before replying, "It wouldn't be appropriate." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken history, years of words left unsaid hanging between them like ghosts in the sterile air. Ethan wanted to reach out, to stop her, to undo what time had done, but all he could manage was, "Maya, wait." She paused at the door, still facing away from him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of sincerity he hadn't felt in years. Her shoulders stiffened, and for a moment, he thought she might turn around, but she didn't. "Apologies don't change the past, Mr. Blake," she said softly. "Focus on staying alive this time," and with that, she walked out, leaving him surrounded by machines and regret. As the door closed, Ethan stared at the white ceiling, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor echoing through the room like a reminder. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat was a gift from the very woman he had once cast aside. In the stillness of that hospital room, stripped of his empire, his power, and his pride, Ethan Blake realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. He had been given a second chance, not just at life, but perhaps someday at redemption. The walls between us, the morning sunlight filtered through the half-closed blinds of Ethan's hospital room, soft rays cutting through the sterile air, landing gently on his face. It had been 2 days since he had woken from the darkness, and the rhythm of his new world had become a quiet melody of machines, nurses, and endless thoughts. Each passing hour reminded him of the fragility of his body and the weight of his past. He had always been a man who controlled time, meetings scheduled to the minute, plans executed with precision, emotions hidden beneath layers of confidence. But here, time controlled him, every breath borrowed, every heartbeat a reminder that life had a limit. The doctors came and went with professional calm, explaining medication, recovery plans, diet changes, and stress management routines. Ethan nodded at all of it, pretending to listen. But his mind wasn't focused on the words. It was on the door she had walked through 2 days ago without looking back. He had seen thousands of faces in his life, investors, rivals, partners, admirers, but none haunted him like hers, Dr. Maya Reed, the woman who had once been his heartbeat and now treated him as if he were nothing more than another patient file. Her name lingered in his mind like the echo of a song he could not forget. Dr. Patel continued to supervise his recovery, cheerful and patient, encouraging short walks in the corridor, simple breathing exercises, and quiet meditation. But even as the new doctor guided him through the physical side of healing, Ethan's mind lingered elsewhere. It lingered on her. He found himself watching the hallway whenever footsteps approached, hoping, without logic or reason, that Maya Reed would appear again. Even though she had said she would no longer treat him, he couldn't stop waiting for her. There was something unexplainable in the air whenever she was near. Not romance. Something deeper. Something that came from a shared history built on both love and regret. It was during one of his afternoon therapy sessions that she reappeared. She wasn't supposed to, but fate has a way of ignoring rules. Ethan was sitting by the window, breathing in slow rhythms, when he heard her voice outside the curtain, calm, instructive, explaining something to a group of interns. She stepped inside a moment later, her presence commanding yet effortless, wearing the same pale blue scrubs, clipboard in hand. She nodded politely to him before turning to the students. "This patient experienced a near-fatal myocardial infarction," she said, her tone purely professional. The key factor was prolonged stress combined with neglect of early warning signs. Remember, the heart does not break suddenly. It cracks over years of silence. Ethan sat frozen, the irony of her words cutting through him more deeply than any scalpel when the students left. Maya remained behind for a moment, updating his chart, and finally glanced toward him. "You're improving," she said quietly. "Your heart is strong enough now for light activity." He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "You really think it's strong?" "Physically, yes," she said. "Emotionally, that's not my department anymore." And before he could reply, she walked away, leaving him staring after her like a man watching his past disappear through an open door. That night, memories returned with unbearable clarity. The past he had spent 6 years avoiding came flooding back like a storm breaking through a dam. He remembered the early days when they were inseparable. Two dreamers sharing a tiny apartment, living on coffee and hope, Maya studying late nights, Ethan building his first company from a rented basement. They had believed they were invincible together, that love could survive anything. But success had changed him, slowly, subtly. The more money he made, the less time he gave. The more applause he received, the less he listened. He remembered the nights she waited for him with dinner growing cold, the arguments about priorities, her tears that he dismissed as weakness. The moment he told her she was holding him back, it all came back like a movie he couldn't turn off. He pressed his hand to his chest as if the weight of memory itself might stop his heart again. The following morning, Maya was in the cafeteria with a colleague when Ethan passed by with a nurse during his walk. He saw her from across the room, laughing lightly at something. Her smile soft and real. He stopped mid-step. The nurse asked if he was okay, and he nodded silently, watching Maya for a few seconds longer before turning away. That small glimpse filled him with both warmth and ache. She was living, thriving, happy, without him, and though the realization hurt, it also humbled him. Perhaps this was what redemption felt like. Not reclaiming what was lost, but learning to be grateful that the person you once hurt had survived you. Later that day, the inevitable confrontation arrived. Maya entered his room to sign discharge papers. She seemed composed, her posture straight, her tone formal. "You'll be moving to outpatient care next week," she said. "Your follow-ups will be with Dr. Patel, but I wanted to personally ensure your chart is complete." He studied her face, the professionalism she wore like armor, and finally asked, "Do you ever regret leaving me?" She froze for half a second, her pen hovering over the paper. Then she looked at him evenly. "No, Ethan, I regret what you became, but I don't regret saving myself." Her words were gentle but final. They didn't sting, they simply revealed truth. "You taught me something valuable," she continued. "That love without respect is a slow kind of death." She signed the paper, placed the clipboard down and turned to go. But this time he spoke again, his voice quiet but certain. "I never respected what I didn't understand. And I didn't understand how much strength it takes to walk away." She hesitated, just long enough for him to see the glimmer of old emotion flicker in her eyes, before she regained her composure and left. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the rhythm of the heart monitor, his mind a battlefield of guilt and clarity. He realized that healing wasn't just about arteries and medicine. It was about accepting the wounds he had caused and the people who had carried them. He thought about Maya's words and love without respect, and how he had confused control with care, success with self-worth. He remembered the time she told him that empathy was not weakness, and how he had laughed now lying in that hospital bed, stripped of pride and power. He understood that empathy was the only strength that could outlast everything else. The next morning, Sabrina arrived unannounced, her heels clicking sharply as she entered, carrying her ever-present tablet. "Good news," she said brightly. "The board wants to honor you with a Resilience Award at next month's gala." Ethan looked at her, the idea almost absurd. A resilience award? For almost dying? It's great publicity, she insisted. It'll show everyone you're stronger than ever. He shook his head slowly. Sabrina, I don't want to be part of any publicity. Not this time, she frowned. You're not making sense, Ethan. The Ethan I know wouldn't waste such an opportunity. He met her gaze steadily. Maybe the Ethan you know isn't the one I want to be anymore. For a moment, silence filled the room. Her perfectly polished facade cracked, confusion crossing her features. Is this about her? She asked finally, about that doctor? He sighed. It's about me, about what I became. She pursed her lips. You've changed, she said coldly, and not in a way I recognize. She turned and walked out, leaving him alone once again. Later that evening, as the sky turned violet beyond the windows, Ethan felt another bout of tightness in his chest. Nurses rushed in, alarms beeped, and amid the commotion Maya appeared again. Instinct taking over, she moved with quick precision, issuing orders, adjusting oxygen flow, her hands steady, her expression fierce with focus. Stay with me, Ethan, she said, her voice low but urgent. Breathe slowly, look at me. Not the monitor, he obeyed. His gaze locked on hers, and in that moment of pain, he saw not the distance of a doctor but the flicker of the woman who once loved him. After a tense few minutes, the danger passed. His breathing steadied. Maya remained beside him longer than necessary, her hand resting lightly on his wrist, feeling his pulse when she finally spoke. Her tone was softer. You scared everyone for a second. He smiled weakly. Including you? She didn't answer, but the faint tremor in her voice betrayed the truth. I once prayed you'd feel pain, she said quietly, almost to herself. But not like this. Not the kind that kills. He looked at her with quiet sincerity. Maybe this was the pain I needed, the kind that wakes you up. Their eyes met, and for the first time since he had collapsed, they both saw the same reflection. Two people broken in different ways, yet still connected by something that had never fully died. She stood, straightened her coat, and said gently, Get some rest, Ethan. Healing takes more courage than ambition ever did. And as she walked out, he whispered after her, Maybe healing starts with forgiveness. When the door closed behind her, Ethan lay still, his heartbeat steady and strong, but his soul trembling with something new. It wasn't love in the old sensing, it was something purer. The quiet awareness that he was no longer the man he used to be. The past had come flooding back not to drown him, but to wash him clean. He turned his face toward the window, the night outside shimmering with city lights, and for the first time in years, he didn't see buildings or deals or profits. He saw the fragile beauty of being alive. Redemption. The first morning Ethan Blake awoke without the constant echo of monitors felt almost unreal. The silence was heavier than sound itself. For weeks he had listened to the steady beeping that measured every fragile second of his survival, and now in its absence he felt both liberated and terrified. The hospital had become a strange cocoon, a place where his soul had been stripped down to its barest truth. And stepping outside, it felt like walking into a world that no longer belonged to him. Sunlight poured through the window like liquid gold, warm and gentle, touching the edges of his healed scars. His body was weak but alive, and his mind clearer than it had been in years. He sat at the edge of the bed, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at them. The same hands that had once signed contracts worth millions, the same hands that had built hotels, fired employees, and pushed away love. Now they looked unfamiliar, thinner, more fragile, more human. The nurse entered to help him dress, cheerful as always. You're officially being discharged today, Mr. Blake, she said with a smile. Dr. Reed signed your final papers this morning. His heart stirred at her name. A quiet ache mixed with gratitude. Did she say anything? He asked carefully. The nurse shook her head. Only that she wishes you good health. He nodded slowly. Those few words meant more than 1,000 apologies could. Outside the hospital, the air smelled different, fresher, sharper, alive. The city moved as it always had, horns blaring, people rushing, lights blinking in windows. Yet to Ethan everything seemed slower, more deliberate, as if life itself had changed its tempo. His driver opened the door of the car, and Ethan hesitated before getting in, looking back once more at the hospital building, the place where his heart had stopped and then started again. The place where he had met the woman who once loved him and had now saved him. Days turned into a quiet routine at home. His mansion felt enormous and hollow, every room echoing with absence. He was surrounded by luxury but haunted by emptiness. His doctor's orders required rest, meditation, and minimal stress, but it was the silence that healed him the most. In that silence, he found reflection. He began reading books he had never had time for, listening to classical music instead of business news, and even walking through the garden without his phone. Yet the more peaceful his surroundings became, the louder the truth inside him grew. That he had wasted years chasing validation. He began writing notes in a leather journal, something he hadn't done since college. Each page filled with confessions, memories, and gratitude. In one entry he wrote, "I built towers of glass and steel, but she built hearts. I won applause, but she saved lives. Perhaps I envied her more than I knew." Weeks later, he attended his first therapy session at the hospital's rehabilitation center, a modest room filled with recovering patients, wheelchairs, and soft music. It humbled him to see men and women from every walk of life sharing stories of fear and hope. He realized that pain made equals of everyone. It stripped titles, erased pride, and revealed the core of who people truly were. At the end of one session, the therapist encouraged everyone to write a letter to the person they most needed to forgive. Ethan knew instantly who his letter was for. That evening, under the quiet glow of a bedside lamp, he wrote to Maya, not as the man who wanted her back, but as the man who finally understood what she had given him. He wrote, "You once told me love is measured not by what we keep, but by what we give. I had everything and gave nothing. You had nothing and gave everything. Thank you for saving me twice, once from death and once from myself." He didn't send it. He folded it neatly and kept it inside his journal, a promise rather than a plea. Meanwhile, life outside his walls continued to shift. News of his heart attack had spread through the business community. Investors called with cautious voices. Partners expressed concern laced with curiosity, and even the media tried to paint his recovery as a tale of triumph. But Ethan refused interviews, declined invitations, and ignored the awards they wanted to give him. For the first time in decades, he realized he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Instead, he began dismantling parts of his empire, selling off properties that once fed his ego, donating large portions quietly to hospital programs that supported cardiac research. One of those donations went directly to a small foundation under Maya Reed's name, the Heart Within Reach Fund. Established to provide free cardiac care for patients who couldn't afford treatment, he made sure the contribution remained anonymous. He didn't want recognition, he wanted meaning. As weeks passed, Ethan's transformation became visible not only in his health but in his presence. His once hurried walk turned slow and thoughtful, his voice softer, his eyes calmer. He had discovered that humility didn't diminish him. It deepened him. He started mentoring young entrepreneurs at a community center instead of boardrooms, teaching them not just about profit but about purpose. During one of these sessions, he told them, "Success is like a mountain. When you reach the top, you realize the air is thin and you're alone. It's better to build gardens than towers." And the young faces before him listened, not to a businessman, but to a man who had learned what it means to be alive. But even as he rebuilt himself, a quiet thought lingered. Would Maya ever see the change? Not through words or gestures, but through the quiet evidence of his new life. One afternoon, he returned to the hospital for a follow-up. The corridors felt familiar. The scent of antiseptic mingled with memories. As he walked past the cardiac wing, he caught sight of her in the distance, talking to a patient's family, her posture firm but kind, the same grace that had once disarmed him completely. She noticed him and hesitated briefly, then approached, her expression calm yet softened by a faint smile. "You look healthier," she said. "I feel it," he replied. "And you were right. Healing takes courage," she nodded. "You've made progress," he hesitated, then said, "I also made a donation to the foundation in memory of the doctor who saved my life." Her eyes met his, recognizing the unspoken truth. "That's generous," she said quietly, "but unnecessary." "Maybe," he replied. "But gratitude shouldn't stay silent." She didn't respond right away, only studied him for a long moment before saying, "People rarely change, Ethan, but when they do, it's because they finally understand what they broke." "I understand," he said, and his tone carried no defense. "No pride, only truth," she gave a small nod. "Then maybe this is what forgiveness looks like, not words. But change." As she walked away, Ethan stood still in the hallway, his reflection glimmering in the polished floor tiles. For years he had chased power to feel important. Now he had learned that the greatest power is the ability to heal, not just the body, but the soul. That night he sat on his balcony, watching the city lights dance below like scattered stars. He thought about everything he had lost and everything he had found again. He thought about Maya, not as the woman he wanted back, but as the mirror that had shown him who he truly was. He realized that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about learning enough to let go. He whispered softly into the night. Thank you, Maya, for letting me learn too late but still in time. When dawn finally arrived, its golden light spread across the horizon, touching the quiet buildings with warmth, and for the first time in years, Ethan Blake didn't feel like a man defined by success or regret. He simply felt human, flawed, forgiven, and free. A second chance months passed and the seasons began to change. Summer's brilliance softened into the gold of early autumn, and with each passing day Ethan Blake felt more alive, more grounded, more aware of the fragile beauty of simply existing. The scar on his chest had faded into a pale reminder of what he had survived, but the transformation ran deeper than flesh. He had learned to listen to the world again. The rustle of leaves, the laughter of strangers, the quiet rhythm of his own heart. He had built empires in his lifetime, but now he was learning to build peace. Each morning began not with meetings or phone calls, but with stillness, a cup of tea by the window, the sunrise painting his world in amber. He would breathe slowly and remind himself that this, not power or possession, was life. He had not seen Maya since their brief conversation at the hospital, yet her presence lingered everywhere, not as a ghost of regret, but as a living force that guided him toward better choices. He often read articles about her foundation's medical outreach, quietly proud that the world was finally recognizing what he had always known, that she was extraordinary. Sometimes he wondered if she ever thought of him, but he never sought her out. He wanted her to have her peace, and he had found his in the silence she left behind. One afternoon, he received an invitation from the hospital for the annual charity gala, benefiting cardiac research. At first he hesitated, unsure whether he belonged there, but something inside him urged him to go, not for recognition but for gratitude. The night of the event arrived clear and cool, the city lights shimmering against the dark velvet of the sky. The ballroom glittered with elegance, crystal chandeliers, soft music, the hum of conversations blending with the clink of glasses. Ethan entered quietly, dressed simply, no entourage, no press, just a man who had come to pay silent respect to the place that had given him a second life. As he moved through the crowd, people greeted him politely, some surprised to see him, others admiring the gentler energy that had replaced his old intensity. He spoke with donors, with patients, with nurses who remembered his recovery. And then across the room he saw her, Maya. She stood near the stage, speaking with a group of guests, radiant in a simple navy dress. Her hair loose around her shoulders, she looked every bit the woman she was. Strong, serene, untouchable, yet achingly human. Ethan watched her for a moment, then gathered the courage to approach. When she noticed him, a faint smile curved her lips, the kind that carried history without bitterness. Ethan, she said softly. I didn't expect to see you here, he returned the smile. I almost didn't come. But you did, she replied. That says something. They walked together to a quieter corner of the hall, where the soft notes of the orchestra filled the silence between them. For a moment neither spoke until Ethan said, I wanted to thank you again, not just for saving my life, but for showing me what living means. She looked at him, her eyes gentle. You don't owe me thanks, Ethan. You owed yourself the chance to become the man you were meant to be. He nodded slowly. Maybe, but without you I'd never have known the difference, she smiled faintly. Life teaches all of us. I was just there when it chose to teach you the hard way. They both laughed quietly, and the sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later that evening, as speeches began and applause filled the hall, Maya took the stage to announce the hospital's newest expansion, a community cardiac center funded by anonymous donations. She spoke about compassion, purpose, and the gift of second chances. Ethan listened, his eyes glistening not from pride but from recognition. She didn't mention names, but when her gaze swept briefly toward him, he knew she knew. And that silent acknowledgement was worth more than any public credit. It was an understanding between two souls who had walked through fire and come out whole. After the event, Maya found him standing on the balcony overlooking the city, the cool breeze playing through his hair. It's beautiful tonight, she said, stepping beside him. Yes, he agreed. Different kind of beauty, the kind you notice only after losing it once. They stood there for a long while in companionable silence, watching the lights below flicker like stars scattered across the earth. Finally, Maya said, I read about your mentorship program, the one for young entrepreneurs. They said you teach about balance and integrity now. He chuckled softly. Well, it's easier to preach when you've already paid the price for not listening. She smiled. That's called wisdom. Maybe, he said quietly. Or maybe it's just learning to live without illusions. When she turned to face him, there was no longer distance in her eyes. Only peace. You've changed, she said. I didn't think people really did. But you did. I had to, he replied. I couldn't go back to who I was, even if I tried. She studied him for a long moment, then said gently, Forgiveness isn't about the past, Ethan. It's about freeing yourself from it. He met her gaze. Then I forgive myself, and I hope one day you'll do the same. She smiled softly. Maybe I already have. For the first time since their breakup years ago, they stood together not as lovers, not as strangers, but as two people who had finally learned what it meant to heal. As they parted that night, Maya extended her hand. He took it, not in desperation, but in respect. Their handshake lingered, the kind that carried gratitude rather than longing. She said, Take care of your heart, Ethan, he replied. It's in good hands now. Weeks passed after that evening, and life moved forward quietly. Ethan continued his work at the community center. While Maya expanded her medical programs, their paths crossed occasionally. At fundraisers, at community clinics, at quiet city cafes, always with warmth, never with regret. They no longer needed to fix the past. They were simply grateful that it had shaped them. One late afternoon, Ethan received a call from the hospital informing him that Maya's foundation was struggling financially after an unexpected grant withdrawal. Without hesitation, he arranged a meeting with a private investor he knew, convincing him to sponsor the foundation indefinitely. He never told Maya of his involvement, for he no longer did good things for acknowledgement. He did them because they felt right. Months later, when the foundation reopened its new clinic for underprivileged families, Maya invited him to the inauguration. She greeted him at the entrance, eyes shining with gratitude she didn't put into words. You always seem to appear when help arrives, she said softly. Maybe it's just timing, he smiled. Maybe it's life returning the favor. That evening, after the guests had left, Ethan walked alone through the new facility, the white walls filled with the laughter of children waiting for checkups, the calm voices of doctors, the quiet hum of machines. He stood by one of the rooms and placed a hand over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, stronger than ever. It wasn't just a physical pulse, it was the sound of purpose, of redemption, of peace. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya found him in the garden outside, sitting on a bench beneath a blooming magnolia tree, its petals falling softly like snow. She sat beside him, and for a while neither spoke. Finally, she said, Do you ever think about what might have been? He looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. Sometimes. But then I realize what is, when that's enough. She nodded. Maybe that's what love really means, not possession, but gratitude. He looked up at the fading sky, the colors melting into gold and lavender, and said quietly, I used to think love was something you win. Now I know it's something you protect. Even if all that's left to protect is its memory. The wind carried the scent of magnolias through the air, and in that tranquil moment, there was no bitterness, no yearning, only peace. Two souls who had collided, broken and healed, now sat side by side, no longer defined by what they lost, but by what they found. Wisdom, forgiveness, and grace as twilight deepened. Maya stood and touched his shoulder gently. Good night, Ethan, she said. Good night, Maya, he whispered. And as she walked away down the path lined with flowers, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath his palm. In the distance, the hospital lights shimmered like stars, and Ethan smiled to himself, realizing that the true miracle wasn't surviving the heart attack. It was learning how to live after it. The man who once measured his worth in skyscrapers and profits now found meaning in every heartbeat, every act of kindness, every quiet moment of understanding. He looked up at the night sky one last time and whispered, almost as a prayer, Sometimes, the heart we break is the one that saves us. And with that, he rose and walked forward, the soft glow of the city guiding his path, the sound of his steady heart leading him into a life finally worth living.